today, as you know, we're joined by Eduarda from GDCI. Previously we've been joined by the likes of AIPF, by WHO, by Amen, and we shall continue to do that throughout the year. I've mentioned that I've already recorded, and just in terms of agenda, it's very simple. I give a little bit of intro, like I'm doing now, a bit of context, and then Eduarda will give a bit of presentation on GDCI and Street for Kids. And then the last half of the hour will be simply dialogue and discussion. So I'll try to navigate the traffic through that. So feel free to participate, join in, raise your hands, or also write a question in the chat, even during Eduarda's presentation as well, where we can just organically discuss that in the second half of the hour. So any questions so far for that? If not, I shall just give a little bit of introduction to Eduarda. Whoa, a lot more people coming in. This is a full packed house. This is great. If not, then I'll just give a little bit of intro to Eduarda. So Eduarda is an urban designer and program manager for Streets for Kids program at Global Designing Cities Initiative, GDCI. She works with cities around the world to help transform streets into safer, more inclusive, and vibrant spaces for children and their caregivers. Before joining GDCI, Eduarda worked at the New York City Department of Transportation. I didn't know that, Eduarda. That's really cool. And co-founded a nonprofit organization, even cooler, advocating for public space in her hometown, Brasilia, Brazil. She holds a bachelor's degree in architecture and urbanism from Universidade de Brasilia and a Master's of Science in Design and Urban Ecologies from Parsons School of Design. So please join me in giving a warm virtual welcome to Eduarda. And oh my goodness, we have a packed house here to do, Eduarda. So, and I shall give you the floor. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. Yeah, thank you so much for the intro, of course, but also for the invitation. I was always wondering how you get to join and present on one of these sessions. So it's really nice to be able to have the space, the opportunity to talk a little bit more about our work at GDCI. Can everyone see my screen? Just confirming. All good? Okay, great. So for those of you who don't know, GDCI, we're a nonprofit and we work very closely to city municipalities and invite people to imagine what's possible when we design streets that put people first. The Streets for Kids program specifically thinks about how we can transform streets through the lens of children and giving them voice and supporting their health and well-being all around the world. And so we've been working with many cities through capacity building or many times supporting project implementations. And we've been quite spread out. We've been really lucky to work with, but also learn with so many amazing cities. And one of the initiatives that we've launched in recent years has been the Streets for Kids Leadership Accelerator. In 2022, we actually had 60 members from 20 cities around the world join us for this online capacity building where cities get to learn from global best practices and from each other to then grow and implement their projects. This year, we're actually going to be working with cities across Brazil, Colombia, and Ecuador. And so if there are any of you guys who are working in this region, please reach out. We would love to find ways to collaborate. And so as all of you know, the way that we've been designing our streets have led to environments like this, the very places where kids are trying to reach. In this case, this is a school in the back of all these cars. And we've created environments that are not only very unsafe, but also very unhealthy for kids who are trying to get to the basic necessity of going to school and have to do that in a way that is very unsafe, that is not pleasant, that is not also conducive to making those connections that we know are so important for their development. And so what we do at GDCI is that we provide a lot of design guidance on how to design better streets. And we do this actually based on the experience of cities who have been doing this but also our experience working with cities. We know that we don't need to reinvent the wheel, but we can learn from what other cities have done and adapt that to the different contexts where we're working. And so we have these guides available for free download in multiple languages, and we really encourage everyone to check them out. And because we know that, most of our streets and our cities are already built, we can't start from scratch. What we actually do through our guides is provide a new lens to ask ourselves what is possible when we're thinking about the different functions that a street can have, but also all the different people and the different users that can benefit from the street and that use that street. And when we're thinking about streets for kids specifically, what are all the needs that children from infancy, or actually when they're inside a woman's belly, all the way through when they're growing up, and the needs that they might have as they're building their autonomy, as they're starting to walk, as they're going to school, and as they're teenagers exploring their cities. So what we really are trying to do is looking at these streets where kids are barely surviving and thinking about ways in which we can create environments that they can thrive. And one thing I wanted to note too is that through the programs, through the guidance that we give and the project that we've supported, we think about Streets for Kids, yes, as one way to improve and promote kids' independent mobility, but also how can we look at the streets as opportunities for kids to pause, to stay, to play, and to be with their families. And so, yeah, through our guidance and through the projects that we've implemented, we've been able to create and transform streets where kids are safe to walk and access their schools, daycares, libraries, public spaces that are so important. Make sure that they can cycle in ease with limited supervision, that they can be active, that they can learn and develop core skills, that both girls and boys can have space to play and socialize, that they can take risks that's so important for them to learn and develop, and that ultimately we're creating streets that are safer and healthier for everyone, and that are including kids, not only in the design, but also sometimes in the implementation of these spaces. And so for that, we really need to understand kids' experiences, how they move, what they do, how they behave, but also what are kids' aspirations? What do they want? What are their dreams? How would they like these spaces to be? What would they like to do and experience? And so when we're doing projects, it's really important for us to learn from that local context, understanding the existing needs, but also those aspirations. And we can do that both by understanding the site, by collecting data, but also by engaging kids and community. And in our experience, but also in research that we've done, we know that doing that leads to more involved kids in their communities who can become advocates for better streets in their work in their cities. This also leads to more informed decision making and increased project support. But this also leads to better projects in streets, which leads to that ultimate goal that we have of safer, healthier, and more accessible cities for everyone. And so today I wanted to talk a little bit about the 2 new handbooks that we launched last year when we were in the World Urban Forum in Cairo. And these are all based on the work that we've been doing with cities. And it's been quite amazing, and to be able to put all of that into guidance that we can share with everyone. So this is all also available to download, and I'll share the link afterwards. But the first guide that I'm going to talk about is how to engage kids, specifically in street design. And in the past few years, we've been working with a lot of projects and testing a lot of different activities and strategies to make sure that we're involving and including kids in the designs of the projects, working across geographies and different scales of projects, and figuring out what are some of these key tools that we can use and replicate and share on the project that we're doing. And so the guide is actually organized in a way that provides recommendations for meaningful engagement. And so helping you define your goals. For example, we know that depending on what's the goal of the engagement, you might be using different tools. And so sometimes it's about sharing information about and the impact and benefits of street design. Sometimes we're trying to encourage kids to become advocate for better streets. And sometimes we're actually trying to involve them into the design and implementation of streets. And depending on those goals, of course, the way you're going to approach it and the way you're going to do it is going to vary. It also talks about your different audiences and what might be the best way to engage kids through different age practice, but also who might be those partners and facilitators that can help you do that, whether it's the caregivers, the teachers in the school community, if it's older siblings or other groups that can be engaged, but also different spaces where you might identify those partners, such as healthcare and service providers or local artists or other advocacy groups and nonprofit organizations that are very much in touch and in contact with kids. We also share so many different tools and methods, varying from very like quick and easy activities, understanding that sometimes we know that cities don't have a lot of resources and capacity, but we know that anything that they do can actually be quite impactful. So we encourage starting from wherever they can, but also through other methods that might require a little bit more of capacity and resources. And that's all very much broken down in the guidance that we provide. We also have available templates that can be downloaded, like using, for example, a Google Slides, and then it can also be translated and adapted for different contexts. So within the link of the guide, you also have access to these editable templates that we have for all the different tools that we have in the guide. And what we realized too is that sometimes more important than the tool is the actual facilitation and understanding what are the insights that can come out from those conversations or the things that kids say as they're making a drawing or doing a mapping exercise. And so we also give tips on how to facilitate for those meaningful outcomes, and making sure that the process is transparent, that everyone understands what is going on, where this is going, what this information is being used for, and ultimately that this is a fun activity because we are dealing with kids and we want this to be a fun experience for everyone. And then moving on to the second guidance, which is focused on evaluation of street transformations near schools. It also provides guidance specifically on how to measure the impact, gather stories, and champion better streets for kids. So one thing that we've realized in a lot of the projects that we've been supporting is that most of them was actually focused in streets around schools. We know that streets around schools are really important spaces to support children's health and well-being. Those are the spaces that kids are accessing the most and where they're more vulnerable to traffic crashes and breathing polluted air and noise and all of that. But they also play a really important role for families and communities. Those are the places where people get together, which many times actually play a role within a community. And so they can also be catalysts for other changes that you might want to see in a city. And we realize too that they can be quite strategic starting points for cities that are trying to transform their cities as a whole. Many times, starting with streets near schools, you might get more acceptance from a community. It could be usually, and I say this because it's not always the case, but usually streets around schools do face less resistance when we're trying to do projects that are slightly bolder, that will challenge the status quo. And so that can be a good way to start to making those bigger changes that we actually want to see across an entire city. And so we've been actually, not only in the projects that we've supported, but in a lot of projects around the world, we've seen a lot of temporary school street events popping up, traffic being stopped in front of a school during school hours or during weekends. We've seen, temporary changes in front of schools. We've seen actually more permanent improvements around these spaces, all of them trying to prioritize walking and cycling, fostering those social connections, promoting outdoor activities, and going from these spaces that were completely focused on cars and had all that space dedicated to cars to these temporary improvements that create better child-friendly environments to those permanent long-term changes that we want to see at the end of the day. And so one thing that we've realized too is that it's really important for us to collect the data for this because for many different reasons. One, we're trying to change the measure of success. For so many years, we've been looking at metrics that focus on vehicles, whether it's safety or level of service or average speed. But we need to collect the metrics so that we have the data that talks about the benefits of streets that focus on people and looking at that through all these different perspectives. And so going from considering this one user to all the users and from focusing on all of these to these specifically and them, the people who are cycling, the kids who are also using these spaces, so that we can make their needs and their journeys visible. And so that then decision makers can start also allocating resources towards those projects once they get the numbers, the impact, and how these people, these groups of people are actually benefited by when we change the logic of who we're designing for and who we're investing in. But we also understand that, the projects that we support many times, we don't have that much time to assess the impact of, for example, the reduction of traffic crashes or, the reduction of asthma rates. We usually need, very robust data collection methods and time to assess those differences. And so as a way to communicate the short-term outcome of what we're trying to see in the long term, we look at these specific metrics in the physical and operational changes that happen to a street, but also to the changes in how that street is used, and what are the different activities that are taking place, which would then lead to these resulting impacts in the long term. And as an example of this project that we supported in Istanbul, we realized that after the intervention, right, we were taking space away from cars and creating more space for pedestrians. And had this impact through the design, we led to a 55% reduction in speeds or vehicles exceeding the speed limit. And that design also affected the activities that were taking place there. So you had a lot more kids playing on the street, which that design enabled. And so what the guide does too is help practitioners and cities measure what matters the most. Because as I said, we know that cities many times don't have a lot of resources or capacity. And so we need to be very strategic in terms of what data we're collecting, what are we trying to evaluate so that we can collect the data that we need to make the case that we want. And so what the guide does is talk about all these different goals and bring examples of metrics that you can collect. And so, for example, if you're trying to assess the impact of road safety, these are a few metrics that you can use in the short term. And then we have case studies showing projects that did that, what were their results, what were the metrics that they use, like this example in Quito in Ecuador. And then we have that all for all the other goals as well. So for example, active transportation, here would be a few metrics that you could use. And then again, another example of a city that used those metrics and what were their results and what was the project that they implemented at the end of the day. This booklet also helps cities identify different data sources. We know that cities have different data sets and different places where you can find the data. Sometimes even one city agency doesn't have the data, and understanding if there's like other nonprofits that have that data or how they can generate that data through observational data, through online research, through photos and videos. It provides a lot of insights into like when to collect the data, when you should be more strategic about that, understanding that schools are also have very specific timings where kids are coming to school, when they're leaving. The peak hours are different for schools compared to other streets, for example. Also gives recommendations into where to collect that data, understanding that, yes, it's really important to collect data around the school entrance, but also the routes to that school, other key destinations that might be around the space. Provides recommendations into how to organize the team and how to collaborate with different stakeholders, and create the team that will be necessary to collect that data. And it also shares a lot of different methods and tools that can be used to collect data related to like air quality, to noise level, to understand people's perceptions through surveys and interviews, interactive boards. And so similarly to the other guide that I shared before, we also have all of these templates for the forms available for download, but that can also be used, can also be edited and adapted for different contexts. And so we also realize that, it's really important to collect that data, but it's also even more important to use that data to communicate those findings to make sure that people know the benefits or the impacts of the project that's being assessed, but that also the right people, whether it's the people who need to be convinced, whether it's the community that, deserves to understand better their environment, or if it's the decision makers that can then allocate funding to this. So for that, it's really important to understand who your audience is, frame that narrative, and choose the appropriate format to communicate that data back, and make sure that that is visual and accessible, and so that different levels of understandings can understand that data and can use that to promote more more projects and move towards long-term impact. And so I think what we're trying to say too with this guide is that we want to make sure that that data is also used to move towards towards policy and citywide programs. And we've seen that a lot of times that data is actually used for that. Like when we have a project that's going through an interim phase, the data can also be used to evaluate if the performance of a space or if the design worked, and that can move into a capital construction project. Or many times it can be really helpful to update a policy and a practice and create design guides on safe routes to school, for example. Or that data can be what is needed to expand a program and have an even bigger impact, like the case of Milan, where they expanded their open plaza program. And now so many people have access to a plaza near their house. So that was basically the gist of those two handbooks. And all of that are really insights that come from the projects that we support and the things that we learn from the cities that we work with. So I'm just gonna try to go a little quick. I know I spoke a lot already. Highlighting a few things from a few projects that we've supported in the past few years. So for example, in Leon, Mexico, we started working there after the Leadership Accelerator in 2022, working with the municipality, but also with the nonprofit called Colectivo Tomate. And they have a really interesting program there where they have these after school programs for kids, so that they're not, after school, they have a place to go. And they wanted to create a safe route between the school and these diff clubs. So through the project, that's what they did. They redesigned the intersections and the spaces leading to the school. And so that radically transformed the street. And it's really cool actually to see how even by expanding the sidewalk space, for example, or even other people are also benefited from that, right? You now have like a street vendor who also has more space now to make his livelihood. So that's what we mean too when we say that we're creating better streets for kids. We're actually extending that impact to other users as well.
That
And
was
so
sorry, Eduardo, that was immediately to permanent interventions, not temporary. These are permanent.
these are temporary. This is a temporary
This is
intervention.
temporary. Okay.
So this was like right after the paint and the bollards and the sidewalk extension that was added
Okay.
in front of the school. So flipping quite quickly here, just so you can see the design and the space. But here I also wanted to flag how like we also made sure to analyze here and see like how much space was reclaimed for pedestrians, and how many kids were actually engaged in this process, which is really important for us, and how that had also an effect on speeds, for example, and even on the kinds of vehicles, like the amount of vehicles now that are passing through a street like this decreased so much, which is the equivalent of having like 150 less trucks passing daily. And so that has a big impact in terms of air quality in this space. We also realized too, of course, data is also really important so as to better understand the design and how it can be refined. And so there was a sense that, there was a lot of people still like using the sidewalk extension as a bike lane because they didn't create a bike lane, for example, or maybe people didn't feel that they could or that they were safe using the street. So this also is a good indicator that maybe the design needs to be refined or there must be changes to the network. So the data that we collect is also very helpful for us to continue improving that design for when this becomes a permanent intervention to take those things into consideration. So this actually also became a video and we were able to interview kids and understand how they felt and how this project affected them, but also talk to caregivers and understand how their perception of safety changed before and after the intervention. And so before, only 1% of caregivers felt it was safe for their kids to ride or play on the street. And after that, that changed to 75% of caregivers interviewed feeling that the space was safer for kids to do that on the street. And in fact, a lot more kids were playing on the street, I think, because, caregivers felt that it was safer because we actually had this dedicated space. And this is really important. Like I said in the beginning, we want to make sure streets are safe, but that they're also conducive to other activities that we know are so important for kids. And this had a really, big approval rate by the community who wanted to see more streets like this transformed. And so now the city is planning to keep this transformation permanent, and they started working on another phase, transforming a second street, which is another project that we supported as well. And so data can also be, a lot of times decision makers are so concerned about these kinds of interventions. And for us, it's really important to have that in hand so that we can say, like, no, you know what? Actually, people are supportive of this, and we should continue doing these interventions in other places, which was the case here, where the city even, chose a street that was like 10 times bigger than that previous one. Also did a lot more engagement with the same partnership with Colectivo Tomate, which was really amazing. Um, and continued replicating and even coming up with newer and different design interventions, of course, that made sense for that other context that they were working with. Um, and here too, the same impact that we were seeing on these interventions here. And again, continues to be very successful among the community where people want to see more of these in their city. Sandy, I have like two more projects to talk about really quickly. I know I'm like basically over time, so let
No,
me
no, no,
know.
that's fine. That's fine. Keep on going.
Okay.
Oh, wait,
Okay, so
just going
this,
back, going back to the Leon one. Was the second intervention funded by the cities themselves, or was that still part of the Street for Kids?
yeah, no, so that's a good question. No, though it wasn't the first one, I should have said, was a seed investment from the Streets for Kids.
Hmm.
And the second one wasn't. We only supported them through our like technical support. We had meetings with them, supported on their with them. We supported them with the design. But this is actually really good too to see that
Amazing.
the city then also was able to allocate the resources for this
Right.
um, afterwards. And so it became a priority for them too. And I think they're continuing to do these across the city. So that's also really good to see. And
Awesome.
yeah,
That's the proof in the pudding, isn't it? They put their money where the mouth is and they believe in it and they're bought in and they're putting money allocated and earmarked towards this. That's great.
yeah. And so then afterwards, I also want to talk a little bit about Lusaka, that we've also supported after the accelerator in 2022. And with them, we were working in a location around the Shilenje School, working with the Zambia Road Safety Trust and the Lusaka City Council and the Road Development Agency there. And so initially we were going to work in front of one of the schools here, the Shilenja Primary School and the Old State House. But when we were on site, we realized, of course, there were a large number of students that were accessing the school by foot. And we started to also understand where they were coming from and where they were coming from and how many kids. And so doing these pedestrian counts was really important to understand where you had volumes of kids coming from and identifying where the risks were bigger. And so one thing that it hadn't been brought up before, but Burma Road actually had a lot of vehicles. This is a big arterial, and they were speeding a lot. So, this is a 60 kilometers per hour street, but actually we found that like over 5% of vehicles were exceeding that speed limit, which is already very high. And 3% were actually above 80 kilometers per hour. So that was like a big red flag. And we're like, okay, we can't think about improving just the street in front of the school if we're not, talking about this intersection here, which is so dangerous for all the kids that were coming from this community on this like dirt road above Burma Road. Um, and so this for us was really interesting too, is that when we were able to bring that data that was collected by the team, but then show this to the engineers of the road development agency and the city council, then they also became more completely convinced that like this was a space that we needed to intervene in. I think before they were a little concerned about the kinds of interventions and how this would change that arterial, but you couldn't really dispute the numbers and the high risk of conflicts that you would have here and how we really needed to safeguard the kids there. And so this is how that intersection looked before, and you had all these like people just like crossing in the middle of the street with no protection at all. And after the intervention, we were able to change that intersection a little bit, tighten the radii, and also add here some kinds of speed reduction measures to make sure that cars were reducing their speeds as they were approaching the intersection. And of course, this isn't like a signalized, it doesn't have traffic
Mm.
signals, and it's so we had to make sure that that cars were reducing speeds like, many meters away before they approached the intersection to make sure that once they got here, they did stop and they did have enough time to react in case there was someone crossing on the new designed intersection. And so I wanted to talk about what sometimes, and again, this was also something that they wanted to do. They were like, oh yeah, we want to add like a play space in front of the school. And we were like, yes, that's amazing and probably very much needed. But we need to make sure that we are setting the minimum standards before to make sure that kids are safe. And that's what we did for the first as a first thing, and making sure that we had, basic infrastructure such as the crosswalks and the sidewalks, and making sure children had that protected infrastructure and making sure that they were protected by adding the traffic calming measures that we needed. And there were effects in implementing those. And after that, starting to think how we can reclaim that excess space and give that space back to pedestrians. So adding new sidewalks, but also then activating those spaces and making sure that, kids here did have an extra space to play, which is so important. And so alongside the street where there was already a space where people informally used, the team also incorporated that into the design. And so what was before, complete dirt, we added this gravel and added a few like street furniture so that people had spaces to sit down and tables to talk to each other and for kids to play. So that's also one of the strategies, making sure that like sometimes we can't reclaim the space in the street, but there are adjacent spaces to the street that can be included into the project so that we can create these public spaces where people can spend time in. And so we also saw that there were a lot more people spending time in those spaces and socializing, which again is something that we do want to see as a result of the projects that we support. And after the grant also was done with it, and again, this was a project that we supported with seed funding. But the team continued working on developing a policy to support safe street designs. So they started working on design guidelines for safer streets around schools. The Zambia Road Safety Trust has actually been doing a lot of projects around schools with the support of other organizations. We just supported them on this one. And so this actually builds on all the knowledge and experience that they've been building with, the implementation of so many projects in Zambia as a whole. And so we just supported them after this and thinking about a little bit about the content that would be in this guide and what is it that they wanted this to be, and helping them refine this as they were engaging a lot of other stakeholders to gather inputs to develop these guidelines and have them approved by the National Bureau of Standards and other stakeholders that are involved in this process in Zambia. And so that was also interesting to see how, one project that we supported also can have the effects of longer term change by when we're incorporating the lessons learned from one project, but also many others, like one that's even in this photo is not a project that we supported, but that all of these can then become insights into guidelines that can then affect many other projects in the city and in the country. And then lastly, just going to talk very briefly too about Hisifi, which was also a really exciting project that we supported. And here too, I think I wanted to show like a breadth of, sometimes tactical, more interim changes to bigger scale projects like this one in Hisifi, which is a city that we've been supporting for a bit. And in this project specifically, they came to us as they wanted to intervene on this street, this neighborhood that had a few streets around 3 schools and daycares. And so actually a lot of different city agencies came together. The city has this program to implement childhood plazas around the city. And so we were supporting them and thinking, how can we not only think about these plazas, but safe access to the plazas and the schools that surround them. And so we're not just thinking about the public space, but we're also thinking about the streets. And so as you can see in this photo, this was, this is in a low income community in the city, which didn't even had these like unpaved roads. And this is actually on an incline. And so when it rained, these became almost like waterfalls and kids had a really hard time accessing the schools because you had all the flooding. And so through the redesign and big investment from the city, this, as you can see, this whole space was completely transformed to change the streets and make sure that we're designing streets that are appropriate for kids, but also creating this amazing public space for a community that has very little access to quality public spaces and playgrounds. And so again, the engagement process was really important, engaging not only the kids, but also the residents that lived around there, the teachers, to get their insights into what were the needs of the kids around there. And so through 4 months of engagement, we engaged over 300 kids in the project. And this, yeah, and then this was really amazing too, that like the city already had dedicated funds for this project, but the design actually was, it was very much oriented toward cards, a lot of space dedicated to like asphalt. And we didn't have a lot of time really to change completely the design because it had already been contracted. But we're able to make like significant changes and show the city actually how when they already have investments in line, they can leverage those resources and still embed a child's first approach. It doesn't have to always be a project that, it's helpful to identify those projects that are underway and make them good for kids as well. So I feel this then became, I think, a really good example for the city to continue improving their streets, even in capital. And so this was, yeah, the street in front of the school. So we were able to also create more shading opportunities. This is a really hot city. You can see a lot of people are just like staying under like the shaded roofing over here, making sure that we were incorporating greenery and that the street, as much as it could have permeable pavements so that this could also be a more resilient space in the future. So, this improved the safe access to these 3 schools for over 500 kids. We implemented raised crossings and so many different traffic calming strategies. And now, most of the kids that are walking around there are walking there in protected infrastructure. And of course, this has a really big impact in terms of public space and how the different schools and also the larger community is going to be able to benefit from this newly designed space. And of course, this image speaks more than the data, but you have so much more kids playing in this space now. And so now what the city is doing is, all of the learnings from this project has been documented. And because this involved so many different city agencies, this has also become an opportunity for them to better dialogue and better align on how they can support each other on projects, but how they can leverage each other's resources and better collaborate on future projects in the cities, which again is also a really great outcome to see when we know that the type of work that we're doing is so interdisciplinary and that needs so many stakeholders on board to see how, to better work together. So I think I know I talked a lot, but there was just so much that I wanted to share. So thank you so much and happy to answer any questions and talk more about.
Eduarda, that was amazing, a rapid fire, a pecha kucha style, and I'll take you. I'll give you a couple of moments to sip on your water and breathe. But thank you. That was very intensive, and congratulations on the breadth of that work. I invite people to raise their hands up or ask questions or put it in the chat. But I have one for you just to kick things off. In Lusaka and Recife, I love the metrics that you've been able to capture, the mixture from reduction in speed, the amount of kids that are playing, and the feeling of safety, particularly for caregivers. Those are paramount. That's very important. Is there a benefit as well to add on other metrics such as IRAP star rating for school? Was that been considered as part of the evaluation process as well?
Yeah, and I think a lot of cities that we work with actually already do that. I know that in Lusaka, the Samba Road Safety Trust does embed that into their data collection methods. I think for us, like we want the cities to just have a lot of different ways to measure, and we're just providing a few other metrics that they can use. I think what we've seen with the IRAP ones is that it does seem like that you need specific training to be able to do that. And I feel like that's something that we've still been trying to understand how we can do that because it does require some level of resources and understanding of how to use that. But I think that could be, of course, something to be incorporated in these projects. And I know that specifically for Lusaka and I think Lima, I didn't show here, but I know that they've been using those, and I think that's been pretty successful for them in showing like the upgrades that they've done for the local authorities.
Yeah, certainly. And I know a few of our partners online today are putting that as well into their projects as a valuable metrics to add on. So thank you for that. So all of that to say that all of these metrics and all the framework is quite modular, right? It's a guide, so you can pick and choose how little or how intensive you'd like to incorporate it. Is that correct?
Yeah, exactly. I think what ideally we would be able to assess, a project's comprehensive impact. But I mean, of course, also too much data can be overwhelming, and then I think it loses a bit of its purpose too. You want to make sure that people understand, the key benefits of an intervention. And I think understanding also what matters the most in a community or to a decision maker or to, depending on what you're trying to evaluate, I think it's important that we prioritize. And so that's why we know that even the projects that we've supported, cities are concerned about different things. And actually their designs sometimes are responding to different challenges that cities might have. And so instead of saying like, this is what you need to collect comprehensively, we do think it makes more sense for cities to decide what makes sense for them. There are some things though that we think are, our utmost importance is like road safety. We should always be making sure that these streets are safe. And so that's why we don't think, we can see how many kids are playing, but if you haven't really improved safety, well, then you're probably not going to see a lot of kids playing. And so there are, in terms of accessibility and safety, I think those should always be collected because I think at the end of the day, we are working with streets and we're working with mobility. But we want to make sure that we're not just measuring that so that we can also see, what are the other benefits beyond road safety that we can unlock when we prioritize road safety. Then you can have more kids playing and more people talking and engaging and being together. And so one is kind of like needed for the other one. And so, yeah.
Absolutely, very much so. And of course, with limited resources, and like you mentioned, you have to be, compromise on which metrics you want to pick and choose, and depending on the audience, because you could spend half of your project just developing all these different metrics altogether. Emma, you have a question, please.
Yeah, thank you, Sunny, and thank you, Eduarda. That was, yeah, a huge run through. I'm already familiar with a lot of the work of GDCI because we've worked with you in a number of countries, but most recently in Azerbaijan, where we had a really brilliant project funded with original funding from the World Bank, EBRD. But I wanted to comment on two things. The first thing is on data and the metrics, original data. And something that is I'm East is currently half of the technical secretariat of the Eastern Partnership Road Safety Observatory, and we're working with police in those countries and with authorities to look at location data. There seems to be.
Yeah, can you please mute your mic, everyone, if you're not talking?
Yeah, sorry
Thank
about
you
that.
very much.
It would be really good wherever you're working in a project, maybe through Sani, to talk to Sani to find out who else is working there. Because, well, we would know if you're working in any of our East partner countries, 15 countries, because we're very close to you. But it's good to build into whatever data is collected by local partner organizations. They will know where problem intersections are. Sometimes the data is terrible. It really is appalling, particularly in African countries, which I'm speaking not on behalf of me, but the African Road Safety Observatories experience huge problems with collecting accurate data. So if you work with other organizations to look at what data they have, it can also be a training experience for police, which I think is absolutely vital, that it's part of the legacy that you involve those stakeholders in understanding about the data and why it's important. The second issue is about training, and we were really fortunate because I can't remember how it started, but Tatiana Mikhailova, who I think is on this call as well, she's our East partner from Moldova, from the Automobile Club of Moldova. She was able to go to Ethiopia and actually do some training with your team in the United States in order to get that hands-on experience of one of your street transformations and the metrics and using your very, very good materials for collecting metrics. And she's then put that to good effect in Moldova, where we've had a number of projects. That was supported by East, by the ACM itself, who gave her a time off, and also by the FI Foundation, I think, contributed a small amount towards her costs, and by, of course, GDCI. So I think that's something that could be looked at, particularly in parts of the world where you don't have currently a footprint. That might be something worth considering in terms of training and access to those skills that you were mentioning. Anyway, thank you very much, and excellent presentation. Thanks.
Yeah, I think, I wanted to actually comment on what you said. I think that's one of the reasons actually that we also encourage so much data collection is that in most of the countries or cities that we work with, that data doesn't exist. So sometimes we're even just we're doing that to create the data that we need to either start working on a project or to communicate the impact. And so that's the case, I think, in almost all of most of all of the cities that we were working with, that data focused on pedestrians and cyclists and kids didn't really exist. And so we're creating the data so that we're starting to create that evidence in places that doesn't exist. And in terms of trainings, I think I was saying like we collect the data as a general because actually it was the local teams that were collecting the data. And so I think we make sure to provide the training to the cities that we're working with and the partners that we're working with to make sure that this is something that they will continue doing even when we're not supporting this. So and I wish we maybe in the future, and we can talk more about this too, Tani, later, is that we could extend these trainings to other partners and maybe choose specific regions or locations where more people can come. Because yes, I agree. I think that's something that a lot of cities and organizations would benefit. And I think that's one of the main things that we do. So yeah, that's what we did in Lima and Leon and in Lusaka, is like providing that training to the local partners who are then able to continue taking this on and hopefully growing that data for their contexts. And then of course making sure that that's shared with the other organizations that are working in those spaces. I think this could be an interesting outcome of this group and identifying where we're based, who's working where, and what's the data that we've been able to like either locate or generate, and making sure that we all have access to that when we're starting to work in a place, because that can be quite challenging, I think, for everyone working in this space.
Thank you, Eduarda, and thank you, Emma, for raising that issue of cross-referencing available data, but also learning by doing and incapacitating the local stakeholders and agencies as well along the way. And I think GDCI has been pretty good at doing that with their accelerator program. Eduarda, just for me, another question as well. Is there, I know you've got the various metrics that we mentioned. In terms of clean air, what tools do you use for that? You mentioned about, the drastically number of trucks that have been able to reduce in a couple of your remediations. But is there sort of, a specific metric around the level of lowering of carbon dioxide and so forth in that?
Yeah, so in our booklet, we actually share how to use the air beam, for example, which is kind of like a low cost little device that you can place in a street, and that we then provide the methodology of how to do it. It starts getting a little complex because what we found, and internally at GDCI, we have a whole team that's been working on doing more research on air quality, is that there's so many variables in terms of like, if you have wind or, there's so many things that might affect it,
Right.
and you might not always get the full picture. And like, you also have to compare that street to another street, and you have to do, you have to do those collections like for, at least like 2 weeks. Anyway, we have all that guidance in the booklet, and I'm sorry that I don't know the very specifics, but we definitely have the methodology and how you can use it, and you can purchase this little device called AirBeam. And we've started doing that in a few of the cities and projects that we've supported. But one thing that we've also realized is that, and that will actually measure more specifically like NO2 and particulate matter that you might want to, and then you can have those numbers. And I
Yeah,
think that method and others are what, cities that are doing these evaluations, they're using those or other devices. But we've realized too that there's another way that we could still at least communicate the impact of that is that ultimately what is bringing air pollution into a street more directly are cars, right? Like, and especially more heavier vehicles that are more polluting, that are using diesel. And so, I mean, we've started looking at the different interventions and to like reduce that, pollution that's coming onto the sidewalk or coming into a school, whether it's by adding greenery or creating more separation between, lanes and the spaces where kids are using. But one thing that's kind of like simple, and at the end of the day, is showing that you would have a reduction in air pollution is just having less cars on a street. And we can't pinpoint to the exact number of, nitrogen or particulate matter that you would have. But if you are counting the amount of vehicles, and if through your design strategies, you are decreasing the number of cars that are coming in, we can say like before you had 300 cars an hour, now you have, I don't know,
right.
30 cars an hour. We have like a little spreadsheet that you can do the conversion, and like that would be the equivalent of having X amount of trucks. And I think for people who don't, because even talking about CO2 or NO2 to the general population, sometimes that doesn't, I mean, we can, yes, it's better to have less pollutants than more. But I think sometimes talking also in a language that people understand of like, oh yeah, having way less trucks, I can imagine that's going to be better for my health because trucks, produce all that smoke and are, have other pollutants. So that's been a way that we've found that that can also communicate the impact. But of course, I think we'd still encourage cities to do a more robust study and how that air pollution has been
Yeah.
decreased. If that's like a goal and that's important for the city.
I think it is, and I think my colleagues and I from the programs team were actually struggling in terms of finding an applied case where we can say we've done remediations at XX school in here, and we have seen, we want to realize that co-benefit picture, right? Where air quality in terms of nitrous oxide, carbon monoxide have decreased by X%, but also in terms of serious injuries and death have also decreased by X amount. Or in lieu of that, we can say a speed have been drastically reduced by X number. So we've seen that, pockets of data here and there, but I'm yet to see, and colleagues and friends, correct me if I'm wrong. I'm looking at you, Jim, and Margie. Perhaps you might have that in your projects, where you have the combination of this, right? And we were trying to get examples of that. And I know Nat is on the line, but Natalie actually wanted to showcase one. And we were like trying to wonder, we've got pockets and bits and pieces here and there, but I don't think we have all of that into one bucket. And yeah, I might be mistaken, but yeah, we were struggling quite a bit, just trying to quickly top of our head, thinking of one. I'll throw it to Anna for a
Sorry,
question,
Sunny,
and then
if I
Jim.
could
Sorry,
just
of course.
Can I just respond to that real quick? We are working on a project that's not as a part of our Streets for Kids program, but we have a partnership with the Clean Air Fund. We're working in Accra, and it's still undergoing, but it is a project that might have what you're saying, and we are doing. It is more focused on air quality and play actually, and so maybe again, this is still something that requires time. But maybe in a few months we can share with you the results of that, and that can be
That's
something.
amazing. And of course, Clean Air Fund is a part of CHI. So I'll speak to you offline about that. That's fantastic. But the combination of all those would be amazing. Anna, please.
Thank you, Sunny. So my question is a bit more specific, but from maybe another point of view, because I'm an advocate for our project in Cluj in Romania. I was wondering about how well the projects fare with the passing of time. Legally, does the local authority recategorize the spaces as parks or playgrounds? Because pedestrian streets, roads, and leisure spaces have very distinct legal urban definitions and allocated budgets accordingly, of course. So how do the local authorities take ownership of the projects once they go into use? do local NGOs become empowered to monitor and intervene when and if maintenance is necessary? Because if these spaces get deteriorated with time or with vandalism, they can actually become a liability, and they can become dangerous for children. So
That's
from
a
a
great
legal point of
question.
view, yeah, thank you.
Thanks. I mean, first of all, we always work with we provide technical support, but the cities are the ones who are implementing this and who are, taking ownership for this. So I think that's always the case. We always talk about maintenance because it is so important. And when we show these like temporary projects, there's supposed to be a stepping stone into more significant change. I think many times people are concerned or afraid of doing bold changes to streets. And so this is a way for them to test new designs and also for communities to understand that like, okay, this is temporary. If you don't like it, we can go back to what it was. And it just provides more space for dialogue with, communities that might be reluctant to change. But we always say that this has to then either, like you're saying, you have to have a clear maintenance plan and like every X amount of months, the paint needs to be retouched and you need to like, reconfigure the space, or you have to have plans to upgrade this into a capital construction because ultimately that's what we want to see. We want to see more permanent change and not these projects, but that is still a challenge that a lot of the cities have. And so, like you said, I think many times cities do have in place partnerships with nonprofits. A lot of the projects that we do have a component of a nonprofit supporting. And they might take care of the maintenance or making sure that communities are also included and feel that they're stewards of the space and that they're taking care of this. And so I didn't show some photos here, but other projects that we've supported in other places, like communities have actually really embraced the project and have become, the people who are taking care and are making sure that like plants are taken care of and that they're putting their own signs saying like, don't throw trash here. But still, we know that it's really important for municipalities to take the responsibility to take care of these projects or make sure that they will become built in capital so that we don't have these spaces that then start looking ugly and bad and then become a reason for communities to complain about it instead of like embracing that change. So it's a mix. And then you talked about the legal aspect of this and how this might change jurisdiction. In the cases of the cities that we've worked with, that was never really an issue. It was still a street. We're not really, we're not changing it completely into a park or a playground. And maybe it's just how the different cities just operate in different ways and have different legal jurisdictions. So far that hasn't really been an issue, but because cities, and when I say cities, I mean like the city municipality, they're the ones who are in charge. That's something that, it's always pretty clear in terms of who is going to, take ownership of the project or who needs to move on with it. Like we're just external partners that are providing the technical support and implementation funds and support.
Thank you so
Okay,
much,
and
Anna.
yeah, one more question, Sunny, a short one, I promise. Have you had like any conflicts with drivers from the respective areas? Because I imagine that they would lose like a lane for driving when, in some of your projects. And how do you manage that?
Yes,
You
I mean
promised
that's
short, Anna. Short question.
That's
Yes,
always an
Eduarda.
issue in any project that we're gonna do, whether it's for kids or not. But I think the kids lens is actually can be quite helpful. Because and again, not always, even that there will be drivers and residents who, they still feel very entitled to those spaces. But I think that's why it's really important to like involve them in the process in the beginning. And it's a constant negotiation of like, okay, you're taking away space from cars, but what are they getting in return too? I think sometimes that's also why we talk about public space, because if people feel that they're just like losing something that they feel entitled to, why will they be supportive of this? And so there has to be some kind of benefit back to the community in terms of like, oh, you're going to get more benches to sit down, or a lot of times it's business owners who are opposed because they think they're losing parking for the residents, and it's like, people shop, right? Not cars. And so if people find that your street is better, is more pleasant, like more people will want to shop there. And there's data showing that. And so I think it's like involving them since the beginning, making sure that they're a part of this conversation, making sure that you're elevating the voices of those people whose voices are usually more quiet and that are the ones who also have needs in the street, and making sure that this is like a conversation and that they understand the benefits of the project, that they're communicated about this regularly, that they don't feel that they're being betrayed or like, I think it's making sure that they're included since the beginning and that they know what's going on and that they understand why. But I think the design is also, the final design is also really important so that they not only lose a parking space, but also maybe get something in return, whether it's more trees, a better environment, or something that then you understand the trade-offs and everything. So
The benefit outweighs the risk. Thank you
yeah.
very much. Jim, you had your hands up. If you're still around, would you like to say something quickly?
Yeah, I just was an eye on the time. It's just been awesome. I've really appreciated everything you said. I could listen to you for another couple of hours, actually. It's so great, and to see so many examples. Thank you. I just wanted to pick up the point you mentioned about indicators and packaging them together. I think it's something we're very conscious of in the Partnership for Active Travel and Health. And what we're trying to do is it's a bold leap, but try and come up with maybe just 5, that everyone should measure and promote the fact that it needs to be a system, so that we're not sort of identifying one or, I think people are motivated by different things. You've clarified that very well, but we think they need to be objective and subjective. Maybe just we can agree on that. Which means we have to engage people. I think that's, even if we just agreed that point, it would make a massive difference to the way data is currently collected anywhere. And trying to work out what are those motivating things is something we're working on this year. We'll be in touch for sure, but we really appreciate what you've done. We share it with lots of people regularly. I still think ultimately people just want to know what is the key thing I should measure, if there's just one thing. And I'd love to put you on that spot if there is time and say, what is the one thing?
This is a conversation we've been having back and forth, and I really want to continue this conversation with you. I think of 2 things. One, we want to know, of course, the number of kids that are having safe access to ... whether it's the school, whether it's the park, whether it's a daycare. So I think and I think that's kind of like a low-hanging fruit. Like, we generally have number of students in a school, or we have, census data. So I think even just understanding the number of kids who are having access, and hopefully it's safe, to a place, that's really important. One thing that I've been thinking about recently is, I think of, like I said before, I think we know that speed kills, and so perhaps having like a focus on speed and road safety is going to be key, and I don't think we can run away from that. But I would really like us to start thinking too about what is the change in activities that take place in a street, because then we're not just talking about movement, we're also talking about what are the new things that start happening in a street after you make it safe. And so I don't know, like some kind of change in activity, whether you have like more people lingering or spending time or playing or socializing, like I'd like to expand a little bit more on that. So then we can actually prove, like, now people have safe and improved access, but they're also benefiting from that. They're doing something there, they're spending time there. And I think that's really key. But then of course, and maybe that's like a little bit more achievable. And then we can get into the health benefits that just sometimes take more time to collect. We've been trying like noise evaluations, that's in perception of noise, which is actually quite important too, because sometimes when we look at noise, kids running around and yelling actually sometimes is louder than cars, but it just feels more pleasant than a bunch of cars honking. And so measuring the perception of noise is also something that we've been looking at. I don't know. There's, of course, like, the list can start going on, but
I really love this discussion where I know we're all very much safety conscious and centric, and so we should. But yeah, there's definitely different programs out there that measures the different kind of things that comes up aside from this, and I think Walk 21, Jim, highlighted a lot of this, right? The socioeconomic development, such as night market, such as culture and crafts and people playing, busking, right? All those things are actually quite riveting and interesting things that can be measured, right, Eduarda, if we wanted to, with the elevation of safe space. So that's all very much interesting space as well that we need to think of. I am very conscious and mindful of time. Thank you very much for staying a little bit over time for those and for you, Eduarda. We can continue the discussion offline and also on the COP LinkedIn group. I don't want to take too much more of your time, but can you please join me in thanking Eduarda for her time and amazing presentation? Thank you so much. And to everyone else, we aim to have at least 6 of this year, so maybe perhaps once every 2 months. Please feel free to reach out to me if you have any burning desire to present, or if you have any other topics, thematics, or presenters that you think might be valuable for all of us to hear. So it doesn't need to be from CHI; it can be from other programs or agencies. And I think looking outward and providing their experience as well it would be very valuable. So with that, Eduarda, thank you again so much for your time, and see you guys again soon. Thank you.
Bye.
Thanks,
Have a great
everyone.